It begins in the quietest hour, when the outside world is cloaked in midnight blue and the only sound is the soft electrical drone of your bedside lamp. In this hush, shadows stretch long and thin, curling at the corners of your room like silent sentinels. That's when you feel it, a subtle shift in the air, the prickle of unseen eyes. You blink through the dimness, heart beating in your ears, and there he stands. Not a nightmare, not a memory, but a silhouette as real as the ache in your chest. The Hat Man. He is tall, impossibly so, his figure drawn in the deepest ink. A wide-brimmed hat obscures his face, rendering him faceless, a void where features should be, and yet unmistakable in his presence. He stands as if he belongs here, as if your room is his stage and the darkness his cloak. You wonder, is this a warning? A visitation from some ancient realm? Or is he merely a shadow, born of your weary mind? The first time I met him, I was alone in a lakeside cabin, the kind where the walls groan with every gust of wind and the windows rattle with the telling of old secrets. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting a tired orange glow that barely reached the foot of my bed. I remember pulling the wool blanket up to my chin, the cold biting at my toes, when I noticed the darkening at the far corner. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Wood smoke, fatigue, the shapes our minds conjure in half-light. But the shape did not change. It sharpened, drew itself upright, and resolved into the unmistakable outline of the Hat Man. I froze, eyes wide, breath caught in my throat. Yet despite the racing of my heart, I sensed no malice. He stood with a kind of dignity, almost as if he were pausing before an introduction. He did not lurch forward or dissolve into terror. Instead, he lifted a hand, gentle and deliberate, as though acknowledging my presence. The air seemed to still, the world holding its breath. And then, as the clock on the mantel ticked past midnight, he faded into the darkness, leaving only the echo of his footsteps and the lingering question, why me? The Hat Man is no mere figment of personal imagination. His legend ripples across continents and centuries, woven into the folklore of so many cultures that it is impossible to dismiss him as a local curiosity. In the misty hollows of Appalachia, old loggers whisper of the Hat Man as a guardian spirit, a being who appears before storms or misfortune, his silhouette a warning to the wise. They tell of men lost in the woods, guided back to safety by the silent tip of his hat. In Eastern Europe, he is known as Der Mann im Hut, a spectral figure who visits those marked by impending sorrow. Some say he is drawn to tragedy, others that he tries to prevent it. Modern science offers its own explanations. Parapsychologists speak of shadow people, a phenomenon linked to sleep paralysis and heightened anxiety. The brain, they argue, is capable of conjuring faces and figures in the liminal space between waking and dreaming. The Hat Man, they say, is a shared hallucination, a psychological scarecrow standing sentinel over our deepest fears. But for every theory, there is a story that defies easy answers. A witness who claims the Hat Man appeared in broad daylight or followed them from house to house, even when they moved across cities. There are photographs, grainy and indistinct, showing a tall figure at the edge of a window, a hat brim catching the light. I became obsessed with these stories, determined to unravel the truth behind my own midnight visitor. I scoured old newspaper archives, unearthing yellowed clippings from the early 20th century. In small Pennsylvania towns, tragedy often followed reports of a tall, dark figure in a bowler hat seen at the edge of town. One story told of a farmer who found his daughter outside in the snow, dazed and barefoot. She described a man who tipped his hat and pointed the way home, his presence as gentle as the falling snowflakes. The farmer, careful and methodical, kept a notebook in which he wrote. He stood there silent, hat in hand, like a gentleman waiting for the harvest moon. I've never felt such sorrow in a shadow. The stories shared a pattern. The Hat Man appeared quietly, never speaking, only watching. Sometimes he gestured, a nod, a hand raised, a tip of his hat. And always, within days, something changed. An illness emerged, a storm swept through, or a family suffered a loss. It was as if he were both observer and herald, a silent messenger between worlds. Skeptics point to the phenomenon of sleep paralysis, that eerie state when mind awakens but body remains immobile. In that vulnerable moment, the mind conjures images, often dark and threatening, to explain the helplessness. But when I spoke to Dr. Elena Morales, a neurologist specializing in sleep disorders, she offered a different perspective. The brain can generate faces, she said, but not the kind of consistency you're describing across cultures and generations. The Hat Man is a pattern that appears even when people have never heard the stories. Her words haunted me. Was there something about him that existed outside our collective subconscious? Armed with folklore, psychology, and a touch of scientific curiosity, I decided to confront the mystery head-on. I prepared my room as carefully as a stage. 2 cameras, one aimed at the bed, one at the window. A motion sensor to capture movement, and a voice recorder tuned to low frequencies. I left the lamp on, heart pounding with anticipation and a trace of dread. As midnight crept closer, I sat in the half-light, waiting. At 12:02 a.m., the recorder sputtered with static, and a soft thud sounded at the window. I snapped off the lamp, letting the darkness settle over me like a velvet curtain. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the silhouette emerged from the shadows. A man in a long coat, hat brim shading his featureless face. This time, I did not freeze. I watched as he lifted his hand, not as a threat, but as if steadying himself in the doorway between worlds. The motion sensor clicked. The recorder hissed, and a whisper threaded through the silence, a sound more felt than heard, ancient and patient. He stood there a moment, watching, and then retreated into the corner, dissolving as the first pale light of dawn crept into the room. When I reviewed the footage, the figure was there, indistinct but unmistakable. Yet the fear I had carried for so long was gone, replaced by a strange calm. In the days that followed, I felt the aftershocks of his visit. I found myself re-evaluating the choices I'd let slip into neglect, the friendship I'd allowed to fray, the doctor's appointment I'd postponed, the small joys I'd taken for granted. It was as if the Hat Man's silent vigil had nudged something loose inside me, urging me to pay attention to the story of my own life. This, I now believe, is his true legacy. The Hat Man is not a monster lurking in the shadows, nor a demon to be banished. He is a harbinger, a silent sentinel who arrives when we are teetering at the edge of change. His presence is a gentle but insistent warning. Pay attention. Take heed. There are paths you've overlooked, risks you've ignored, wounds you've left unhealed. Folklore teaches us to respect the messenger as much as the message. In Appalachia, some families leave a glass of water by the bedside, a humble act of hospitality meant to calm the spirit and welcome his guidance. In the Balkans, it is tradition to draw a simple circle on the floor, inviting the Hat Man in while protecting one's spirit. These rituals are not meant to ward him off, but to acknowledge his role as a bridge between the known and the unknown. So when you next sense a presence in the dark, a whisper at the window, a flicker at the edge of your vision, imagine tipping your own hat in greeting. Instead of recoiling in fear, offer a gesture of understanding. Perhaps the Hat Man is not here to frighten you, but to remind you of what matters most. Time slips by, and you realize you are no longer alone. The Hat Man has stepped quietly out of your room, but his message lingers. In darkness, there is always the possibility of light. In fear, there is the prospect of growth and change. All it takes is the courage to look beyond the shadow and listen to the silence. Tonight, as you drift between dreams and waking, remember that not all who visit in the night are monsters. Some are quiet guardians, urging you to wake up, to your life, your choices, your untold story. The Hat Man walks on through the hush of midnight and the brightness of dawn, carrying with him the gentle warning that every ending is also a beginning, and every shadow contains the faint outline of hope.